CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The 21st century is the African century. That is the hope of many of the continent's leaders. As an emerging market and in the period leading up to 2015, the continent's GDP grew at an average 5% per annum. But to maintain this growth, expert leadership will be needed, particularly in the fields of education, innovation, and entrepreneurship. This is why the African Leadership Network, a community of some of the continent's most dynamic and influential leaders, gather together every year to strengthen relationships, increase collaboration, and create lasting change on the African continent. And this week, we are here at the Africa Leadership Network 2017 gathering to find out exactly how they plan to drive Africa's growth to new heights. I'm Beatrice Marshall from the beautiful island of Mauritius. Welcome to Talk Africa. My guest today will be talking education, entrepreneurship, and innovation. And with me here today, Dr. Fred Swanika. He's the founder and chairman of the Africa Leadership University Group. Welcome to Talk Africa. Also, Dr. Catherine Kovirola. She's the provost and chief academic officer, Africa Leadership University. And also Mr. Tonje Bakang, director of entrepreneurship, ALU. Welcome to the program. Fred, let me start off with you, Dr. Swanika, because the Africa Leadership University was your idea as the founder here. Tell us about the African University. What is it about?
Well, the African Leadership University is an institution that aims to develop Africa's top talent. We believe that Africa's greatest assets are its people, and not necessarily its gold and diamonds, but really the talent that we have. And so it's a large-scale initiative that aims to develop 3 million leaders for Africa through a network of new universities that we're building across the continent. In fact, I was actually inspired by a visit to China a few years ago, and just looking at how China drives lots of large-scale development efforts, and I thought we should do something similar in Africa. Let's build a large network of universities that can develop our talent.
When you talk about a large network of universities that can develop the talent, and you're talking about 3 million,
yes,
that is your target. What is it that you found that was lacking in the universities that are available, or in the higher institutions, or in the academic standards that were lacking, that were not building what you want built in this university?
Well, several things. First of all, there just are not enough seats in existing universities. Only 8% of people who are supposed to be enrolled in tertiary education in Africa are actually enrolled. This compares to almost 30% in China. So we realized that we needed to just build more universities. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the existing universities that exist in Africa are not producing people who are relevant for the workforce. So many people, about 45% of university graduates in Africa are unemployed. And they're not producing people who have the right skill set to solve Africa's greatest challenges, who have innovative thinking, and who have entrepreneurial thinking, so that we can create our own jobs. So we realized that a new type of university would be needed that could be more innovative, that could be rolled out faster than have been done before, and that could produce people who are more relevant for the workforce, and who can create their own jobs.
Dr. Kovirola, relevance to the workforce, because globally there are standards. Tell us the difference between what you're offering here and what is available globally.
So what we're creating and offering and developing is ethical leaders who are entrepreneurial and who are ready for the workplace. We're creating and educating a whole new group of young people who are critical thinkers. And so what we're doing is truly, truly innovative. I've been in the higher education system for over 3 decades. And one of the things that's truly lacking is this integrated approach of preparing young people to work collaboratively in teams, who are able to take the problems that the globe is facing, and that the African continent is facing. And those issues and questions and problems are emerging very rapidly, and we need graduates who can tackle those problems and bring the solutions, and that's what we're doing.
Mr. Bekang, you're in entrepreneurship, so give us a little insight into your experiences, into the lessons that you're learning that can be translated into what the students are supposed to get. Where is the gap?
I think the gap in the African market is the resources, the mentorship, this toolbox that will help a student from LU to become an entrepreneur and to create jobs. And in order to be able to take a big risk, you have to feel like you're surrounded by people who will support you. So what we're creating right now at LU is a community of leaders, mentors, investors that are open-minded. In most of the countries in Africa, being an entrepreneur is seen as a failure. You have failed looking for a job, finding a good job, and now you want to do this thing, like building a company. Where, as LU, you see those entrepreneurs as heroes because their goal is to create value. Their goal is not to find one job for them, it's to create thousands of jobs for the continent.
So many people will be asking, how do you train an entrepreneur? How do you educate an entrepreneur?
So first, we take them out of their comfort zone. We teach them how to take risks, to track success, to be able to be data-driven and not just to, like start a business just based on one intuition. So by identifying issues, the global issues, and finding solutions that will impact their local communities, then they create a service. What we do at LU is we help them to monetize this service and to create value for the community. So,
and if I can just add on to that, you see, I believe that entrepreneurs learn to become entrepreneurs through practice and not through theory. So on the campus, we simulate an economy where they all have to form teams and actually found a real company. And this person is the CEO of the company, this one's the CFO, and we have a venture capital fund on the campus that we invest in them. So they get to practice entrepreneurship in a real sense and manage cash flow and build products and sell it on a small scale, because many of the world's greatest entrepreneurs start on a small scale and they get practice, like Mark Zuckerberg in his dorm room at Harvard building the small thing that became Facebook. And so we are simulating that kind of experience all the time on the campus so that they get the confidence and the practice to do it at a bigger scale later on.
Right. Dr. Kubrola, let's step back a bit, though, and look at the deficit in terms of education on the continent. What would you describe as some of the challenges in the current education system that could perhaps need to be transformed if we are to achieve what you're trying to achieve at the LU?
So I would say some of the gaps that we see on the African continent are global. There are a lot more students than there are people who can teach them. And the old traditional models of tertiary higher education rely on the sage on the stage, the faculty who holds the information and the knowledge. And in the past, and even in most institutions now, it's that faculty who's imparting it. What we've done is completely flipped it. And we're really believing in the principle of abundance, and we have students in abundance. And we believe that if we can harness the creativity, the innovation, the entrepreneurial spirit in these students through peer learning and through self-directed learning with the scaffolding of faculty as well as industry experts. So it's the full package. It's an integrated pedagogical approach building on practice, as Dr. Swanaker was talking about. It's that learning, doing it together, getting feedback, and doing it again over and over, and that's how you build these skills and competencies. So it's a completely different approach to pedagogy.
Right. And if I can just add on to that, one of the things, as we mentioned earlier, is we're trying to create people who are relevant for the workforce. So the other thing we do with this university is we really blur the boundaries between education and employment. Our students spend every year 8 months on campus and 4 months in a job. So by the time they graduate, they already have a year of work experience. And even during the 8 months when they're on campus, they're solving problems for companies every day. We have real companies come and we say, give us your toughest problems. And then our students form teams and they work on them and they deliver products, results to managers. So they learn how to work with real organizations from day one.
So are we saying, though, that today, the needs of Africa today, we do need now to shift focus from the old or the traditional education models?
Absolutely. The traditional education models were replicated after models that were built in the West 500 years ago. The needs were different. The scale was different, and we have a very different context. So we need to create a new model that is more relevant for the African context for today, and that is much lower cost, and that is more effective, and that produces people with skills that the 21st century needs, and not just academic theory. So we need people who are practical, who can come out, they can really implement solutions to solve the biggest challenges and the biggest opportunities that Africa has. And that's what we're trying to do.
Mr. Bakang, stepping back a bit though, what are those needs that Africa needs? What are those needs that Africa has today that need to be bridged?
So we can talk about health and have more engineers and software developers, like bringing local solutions. Usually, for example, we're looking for like engineers in the States, in Europe, to solve our own problems. We're talking about finance. Like, people talk about cryptocurrencies, bitcoins, but what we want is to find people who can focus on market and focusing on how do we disrupt the economy here in Africa. So being practical and using like the new era of tech for the continent makes a lot of sense for us.
Right. I want to come back to you, Dr. Swanika, because you talked about costs and you want to make this cost effective. And of course, one of the most prohibitive things on the continent when it comes to education is costs. How are you managing the cost aspect of it?
Well, there are three things that we're doing to manage the cost. The one is we are rolling out campuses to cities, to different cities, so that people don't have to travel for education. They can get it locally accessible to them. So that's the first thing. The second thing we're doing is we are using technology and a different way of teaching and learning. So as Catherine mentioned, we are shifting the emphasis. Universities were built in an era where information was scarce. And so to get knowledge, you have to go to a university and get it from a professor or from a library book. But today, information is ubiquitous, it's everywhere. So that allows you to do different kind of learning, where the student can teach themselves using technology, they can teach each other using peer-to-peer learning, and they can learn through projects and internships and so many other ways. So we are saying shift the focus of the learning from the professor, who is more expensive and is not available, to the student, who is actually free.
Well, we are looking at a continent now that is going to be about 1.2 billion people.
Yes.
In coming years, if not already. I mean, for this number of people, though, how accessible is what you're offering going to be?
Well, we're talking about having 250,000 students at a time at least. This could be even bigger. It could be 500,000, it could be 1 million students at a time. And the cost for someone to attend is going to be just a few $100s. Because the other thing we've done is we have set up a finance scheme where we're raising funding from investors, which finances the student's education. And when the student graduates, they pay back a percentage of what they're earning back to the investors. So if they're unemployed, there's nothing for them to pay. If they're working in a job and they're making a small salary, they're just paying a percentage of that. So everyone pays back what they can afford. So what this does is we can give people world-class education that can compete with the best universities in the world for just a few $100, $100, $200. And this is the game changer for not just for Africa, but for the world.
All right. Yes, Mr. Becker.
We invest in people. We invest in the youth, like the investors invest in an entrepreneur. And I'm sure that in order to scale, like having this offer, like it's about like a couple of hundred of dollars, will help us to scale and reach like 1 million, 2 million, 3 million students in about a few years.
Right.
So it's a shift in the education in Africa.
Right, Mr. Bakang, Dr. Kavarola, and Dr. Shwanika, to stay with us. We'll continue with this discussion in a moment. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we will continue with our discussion on Africa's future, education, innovation, and entrepreneurship. To stay with us.
My home country lies at the foot of Africa, the southernmost tip of our beautiful continent, and the unique point at which two great oceans meet. Now, on a clear day in Cape Town, you can just make out Robben Island, the place where Nelson Mandela was jailed for so long. South Africa has changed so much in the years since then, but it is this country's history that shaped me and took me into reporting. I'm inspired by Africa's men and women of courage. It's the everyday hero who brings out my passion. The creatives, the decision makers, the risk takers who are shaping a bright African future. I see them in Cape Town. I see them in the pulsating city of Johannesburg. I see them across the continent, and I know our time has come.
CGTN is a platform where African voices can speak for themselves and take their stories to the world. My name is Lindy Mtongana, and I'm a news anchor and reporter for CGTN.
Welcome back to Talk Africa. We are discussing Africa's future education, or the future of education in Africa, with Dr. Shwanika, Dr. Kavarola, and Mr. Bakang from the African Leadership University. I just want you, Dr. Shwanika, to give us a brief view of the network, the difference between the African Leadership University and the African Leadership Network. What is the difference there?
The African Leadership University is part of a larger initiative called the African Leadership Group, which aims to bring together leaders across different generations. So we have an academy in South Africa, which we started before the university, and that works with teenagers who we think can become the next generation of leaders. It's a smaller project. Then we have the university that is working with more mature people between the ages of 18 to 30. And then the network, you can think of it as our own version of Davos, where it's working with more mature leaders who are CEOs, they are presidents of countries, they are ministers, and we bring them together every year for a conference. This is the 8th year that we're doing it. There are 300 people here from 35 different countries, and they are here to build relationships with each other and to work with us in our mission to develop better leaders for Africa. So they're going to mentor the younger leaders, they're going to be giving them job opportunities, they're going to be investing in them, and it's really part of the value chain of leadership, where we're saying let's bring together leaders across different generations to really collaborate to transform Africa for the better.
How important is it to learn a degree?
Well, I give a lot of talks when I go around the world, whether it's Europe, it's USA, in Africa, and I ask people in the audience to tell me how many of them are doing a job that is related to what they studied in college. The answer is never more than 10%. So most people enter careers that have nothing to do with what they studied. Why is that so? Because the world is changing so fast that what you study quickly becomes outdated. If you studied computer science 5 years ago, you were learning how to write programming for a desktop computer where the data was stored on the device. By the time you graduate, the data is in the cloud. And you're now not talking about a desktop, you're talking about mobile devices and virtual reality. So the world is changing so fast that what you learn quickly becomes outdated. And the fact is the jobs of tomorrow have not yet been created today. We don't know what they are. So we need to create people who are broad thinkers, who are problem solvers, who can really understand any problem and who can reinvent themselves. So we believe that the purpose of education should not be to teach you facts and figures for today, it's to teach you how to learn so that you can keep learning for the rest of your life. And that's what we are trying to do.
Right, Dr. Kavarola.
And I think about it from interdisciplinarity. And so at ALU, we have faculty and we have industry experts from many different disciplines. And as a student identifies a mission, an issue that they want to delve into very deeply for the purpose of coming up with a solution that can have impact, it's important that they bring in these different disciplines. So it's not that we've thrown away the disciplines, but rather we are taking the best of all of it, combining it with industry and the real world, and teaching our students, while they are still earning their degree, how to integrate it. So it's about integration. It's a new level of understanding that typically only happens at the graduate level. And we're really providing that opportunity for our students.
Right. Before I get to you, Mr. Bakang, I just want to come back to you, Dr. Shwanaka, because you're talking about creating you're creating an education for the jobs that are yet to be created. So if you look at Africa's position and our education systems still steeped in the 1960s education, post-colonial education system. So just how outdated is our system today? It's completely outdated. It's not producing, which is why many countries are looking for university graduates. But there are many university graduates who are sitting there and they're not the right caliber they're looking for. So there's a mismatch between the education that universities are producing and what employers are looking for, and that's because they're stuck in the previous way. So as Catherine has mentioned, what we're saying is we need to train people to see a problem, to be problem solvers, and then start with that problem and then find the knowledge you need to solve that problem. So that we do what we call just-in-time education. You acquire the knowledge just as you need it to solve the problem, not just-in-case education, which is where you learn facts and figures and then you forget it. So that's really the difference here. It's saying create people who are general problem solvers, who know how to learn, and then they will be ready for any job in the 21st century.
Right. And can I just add one other thought that I think of? Why it's so important for this to be done on the continent of Africa is because if we persist in bringing in education or sending young people from here out, it's really a perpetuation of coloniality. And part of our curriculum really addresses those issues. And that is why this is education for the African continent by the students and by the faculty from across the continent. And I think that's a real important distinction.
Right, Mr. Bakang, and that is the question though, because we may be educating the African youth, we may be building this team of highly talented entrepreneurship people, but where are the jobs?
The job of many. There's like so many challenges and services that we can create that will bring even more jobs. Let's take like health again. We will create new jobs on the continent. Right now, if you look at the market, yes, there's just few opportunities. But every entrepreneur, every student will become a leader and create like data scientists, like professors, web designers, account managers, like creative people. Like there's a new world that needs to be created. And so we aim to support the students to be a part of this movement.
And then, in addition, we've identified these 7 grand challenges that Africa is going to face in the next 50 years. And 7 great opportunities. The challenges are things that if we don't solve them, we are going to have a lot of trouble. The opportunities is unusual advantages where we have been blessed as a continent. So the challenges are things like urbanization, healthcare, education, infrastructure, governance, youth unemployment, climate change. And we have opportunities like agriculture, the conservation of our wildlife, how we manage our natural resources better, the empowerment of women. So these are all opportunities. And if you are entrepreneurs, you understand that your job is to solve a problem for society. And Africa has many problems. So if you think like a problem solver, which is the kind of education that we're creating, then you're not going to come out looking for a job. You're going to create your own job. And in doing so, as Tonya was explaining, you're going to create jobs for many other people. So this, remember, is the top 3% of the talent in Africa. So they are not the ones who should be coming out looking for jobs. They are the most talented in Africa. So it's their job to create jobs for other people and not just to look to be employees.
Dr. Kubrola.
Yes, and I think that's because, as I said earlier, we are creating critical thinkers. And we are scaffolding them with that. And higher education or tertiary education up to now has prepared people for the present. We're preparing students and graduates who are future-proof, to use a term that Dr. Swaniker uses often. We're preparing them so that whatever comes, they will be prepared, and that they're the ones who will lead, whether it's in government, in the private sector, in other sectors that will emerge. And as we've all witnessed, the globe is changing so fast. We are so interconnected. Every month, technology changes the game. And so what's really important in our pedagogy and in our curriculum, we actually have a degree that's global challenges. And students declare a mission that's in one of the challenges or opportunities that have just been identified. And so that's what's really innovative. We are reimagining tertiary education, and we have a very selective process in terms of who we're admitting, and then we are putting resources and support for those students by the faculty, the academic support staff, and the fiscal resources that they're being provided in order to ensure their success.
Right, I'm going to get a winding up comments from you in a minute, but Mr. Bakang, I'll start off with you because let's look forward. Because we're starting a new program, re-engineering Africa's education. Let's look forward. What is the ultimate aim of what you're trying to do here? And when you look at Africa's education in the future, what does that look like?
So what I'm trying to do is to empower the future of Africa and create bridges between the most innovative program in the Silicon Valley, in New York, in London, Paris, and then find a way to localize those solutions. I think that the future of education in Africa will be a pilot for the best way to solve global challenges. I think that what we're doing is so innovative and creative, and we also already are seeing like the proof of success. We already have successful entrepreneurs coming from LU, from LA, and from like the group in general. And our goal collectively, but my goal is to see how we can take what ALN or L Group is doing here in Africa and then solve issues in China, in India, and even in Europe.
Right, Dr. Cabrola.
Well, you know, it all started on the continent of Africa, everything, all of us. And I really firmly believe that the movement that we are part of, that ALU is part of, and the preparation of the leaders and the thinkers and the problem solvers, that the solutions for education as well as all these global challenges will be created here, and that it will go global, just as my colleague has said. And so that's what I'm envisioning, and that's why I'm part of ALU.
Dr. Swaniker.
For me, this whole project is about impact. It's not just education for education's sake. It's really education with a purpose. So for me, I'm looking at a continent in 30 to 50 years which is developed, which is sophisticated, which is innovative, and is really leading not just Africa, but is globally competitive, right? And where people have jobs and good healthcare and good infrastructure and all of the things that makes a good life. And so we are looking at this as a means to an end. We're not going to be successful if we've just produced graduates. We're going to be successful if we've created a better Africa. And that's what this institution is about.
Right, Dr. Fred Swaniker, we'll leave it there for the moment. Dr. Cabrola and Mr. Bakang, thank you all for being on Talk Africa. And that's all we have time for on the program this week, but you can join this conversation on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And to join us again next week for another edition of Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall. Bye-bye.